Welcome. Welcome to Move to Learn, the Handspring webinar for manual practitioners and movement therapists. Today is Monday, April 17th, and we are thrilled to welcome David Lauterstein, one of the authors of The Memory Palace of Bones. David Lauterstein is the co-owner of the Lauterstein Conway Massage School and is the founder and teacher of deep massage, the Lauterstein method. He is the presiding chair of the Massage Therapy Advisory Board in Texas under the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. Just thinking about licensing and regulation in Texas. There goes my voice. I'm with you now. David has been in private practice since 1977, doing deep massage, structural body work, then cranial sacral work, and zero balancing. Let's take a look at the cover of the book now, but before we do that, we'll get acquainted with how things work. That would be the next slide. This presentation features copyright material from the book. Please note, this cannot be shared anywhere without permission from the publisher. The chat is on, so do say hello and tell us where you're joining from. This event includes readings from the book, guided embodiment experiences, discussion, and Q&A. For the guided embodiments, David will lead us through two of them. And for these, you can either use a mat to rest on the ground, or you can perch on your stool, your chair. Either one will be comfortable and the right support for the embodiment experience. We welcome your questions. Please submit these using the Q&A button on your screen. We aim to finish on the hour, but may continue for 10 minutes after the hour, and David is happy to answer your questions. We are recording this webinar and will share a link to it in our follow-up email. We're also streaming live on YouTube, and we draw your attention to the disclaimer that this discussion is for informational and illustrative purposes only and is not meant to impart medical or therapeutic advice. Now to the gorgeous cover of The Memory Palace of Bones, Exploring Embodiment Through the Skeletal System. David Lauterstein, co-author of the book with Jeff Rockwell, Doctor of Chiropractic. David Lauterstein, licensed massage therapist, is a co-owner of the Lauterstein Conway Massage School in Austin, Texas, the founder and teacher of deep massage, Lauterstein method, and the zero balancing faculty member. He teaches worldwide and is the author of the books, Putting the Soul Back in the Body, Life in the Bones, and the Deep Massage book. David's co-author, Jeff Rockwell, is a doctor of chiropractic. He is on the postgraduate faculty of Life Chiropractic College West and Parker University College of Chiropractic, as well as the Institute of Manual Neuroscience, of which he is the co-founder. He writes for several chiropractic publications and has published 5 books of what he calls somatic poetry. David Lauterstein, welcome to Move to Learn.
Hi, thanks very much.
And I would love to see you on the screen. So far, I just see the slide of the book. There you are. David, welcome.
Thanks very much. And thank you to Handspring and Singing Dragon and the various people who've been involved in helping this book come to light. And Elizabeth, to you as well. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. When this book is very, very new, when was it published?
It was published at the end of March, and it almost immediately went into a second printing, which was really gratifying. So, yeah.
Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Where did this title come from? How did you and Jeff come up with this title?
Oh, well, there is a book by a wonderful English scholar, Francis Yates, called The Memory called The Art of Memory. And she goes through basically this idea of the memory palace. It's been a very influential book for me, beautifully written. And the idea of the memory palace came about, first documented with Cicero, because back in the old days, since there weren't that many books around, people had to become learned. They had to really avail themselves of their memory because oral tradition was largely how information came. And so they developed these methodologies, and one of the primary ones was to create an imaginary palace in your mind, perhaps based on a palace you had been to or to some other kind of sacred sort of building, and then to imagine populating the rooms of that palace with things that you wanted to remember, almost like keepsakes, but also could be a legal case and the details of a legal case being symbolized by certain animals or symbols or whatever. And so the whole idea of a memory palace being in your mind came to us as Jeff and I were talking. And then, of course, the memory palace of bones was obvious because that's the topic of our book.
How did you and Jeff meet, and how did you come to the agreement that you would write a whole new poetic book of anatomy?
Sure. Well, right near the beginning of the pandemic, Jeff called me. Jeff had taken a couple of deep massage courses with me, one in Maine, one in California, and we'd become friends quite quickly. And I had heard of him as a teacher of myofascial work, so we had a lot in common. And he called me one day toward the beginning of the pandemic and said, "I want to write a book with you." And I was like, "Oh, really? Well, what kind of book?" He said, "Well, I want to write it like your first book." My first book was a book called Putting the Soul Back in the Body that was focused on muscles. So having taught muscles for a long time at the Chicago School of Massage Therapy, I just kind of wrote 2 or 3 pages about each of the major muscles of the body. And some were witty, some were kinesiological. There was kind of a blend of humor and clinical understanding. And he said, "I want to write like Putting the Soul Back in the Body, but I want it to be about bones." And I said, "Well, that's very interesting." I didn't know Jeff as a writer, so I said, "Why don't you send me something along these lines?" So he sent me something which I actually am going to read from, on the sternum. And I was like, "Oh my God, you are a good writer. And I think this is a really good idea." So that is how we embodied the memory palace of bones. And so Jeff was the person who first called for it. Quickly, we agreed. And then also, there's a book by a favorite author of mine, John Berger, in which he and a fellow artist go back and forth, corresponding each about the same color. So it'd be a chapter on indigo with contributions of each of them, chapter on violet, chapter on blue, on cadmium red. The title of the book was "I Send You This Cadmium Red." And I said, "Why don't we do it like that, where there's a piece by you and a piece by me, mixing up our ideas, rather than trying to write one unitary thing, we'd have our 2 perspectives." And that also added to the unusualness and I think the richness of the book.
Yes. I have a rainbow of colorful questions to ask.
I love it.
However, now that the curiosity is piqued, how about reading from an excerpt of the brother and sister of the lower leg?
Sure.
Yeah, and then tell us what you're reading from, and maybe give a little background of how this particular room of the memory palace evolved.
Uh-huh. Well, this builds a bit on my background, which prior to my involvement with massage therapy was in music. So fascinated, as is Jeff, by the parallels between the realms of music and the realms of bodywork and anatomy. So this begins talking about the legend of the singing bone, which has been used in Grimm's fairy tales, in Mahler's book called Mahler's symphony called the Klage der Lied. Stories told in many cultures of the singing bone. One variation is that Brothers Grimm tale of two brothers who set out to kill a wild boar that's been threatening people. And the first who did would earn the reward offered by the king, namely the hand of his daughter in marriage. The younger brother did find and killed the boar, but on their way home, the older brother slaughtered and killed the younger brother, whose body fell down to below a bridge. And the older brother went then to the king, presented him with the boar, and he was presented with the hand of his daughter. But then years thereafterwards, a shepherd was walking over the bridge and saw a little snow white bone lying in the sand below. Thinking that it would make a good mouthpiece, he picked it up and carved it for a mouthpiece for his horn. Then he blew into it, and to his great astonishment, the bone began to sing by itself, "Oh, my dear shepherd, you are blowing on my little bone. My brother killed me and buried me beneath a bridge." "What a wonderful horn," said the shepherd. "It sings by itself. I must take it to the king." When he brought it before the king, the horn began to sing that song. King understood it well and had the earth beneath that bridge dug up and found the bones of the younger brother, and they were laid to rest in a beautiful graveyard, and the older brother was severely punished. Now, this brings us to an awareness that many of the bones in human and animal bodies have been used as in music. The rib cage was no doubt the first xylophone. The hollowed out long bones of animals and humans, as in Grimm's legend, were used as wind instruments. So every bone in us has, in its own way, its own song, its own music, its own message. And that brings us specifically to the discussion of the tibia and the fibula. The tibia being the second strongest and largest bone in the body next to the femur, it has at its center an medullary cavity that produces and stores marrow. After death, that marrow decomposes and a hollow triangular tube remains like a pyramidal tower that can act as a wind instrument. And the etymological origin of tibia points us to this use because the tibia was an ancient Greek wind instrument. Archaeological finds indicate it was double reeded like the oboe, but with a larger mouthpiece. And in traditional Western music, the tibia would correspond most closely to the beautifully named oboe d'amore, the oboe of love, which was used by Bach and Telemann in their early concertos. The other leg bone is the more delicate fibula. Too narrow to be an instrument like a wind instrument, it looks very much like a violin bow. It's commonly harvested, interestingly, to construct the mandible, itself integral to speech, bringing a kind of musical connection to these two bones. The fibula's proximal head, which is closer to the knee, acts as the insertion for the biceps femoris, lateralmost hamstring, and that origin of the fibularis longus muscle travels along the fibula down to the bottom of the foot and forms the deepest tendon in the bottom of the foot, ultimately inserting into the medial first metatarsal. And also attaching to the fibula are muscles that extend the toes and muscles from the deep posterior compartment of the lower leg. The fibula and the tibia, like the arms, radius, and ulna, are connected through an extensive interosseous membrane that stabilizes their association while allowing some flexibility between them. And it brings up a story for me that influenced me profoundly about how we use the body. I read about a boy who was born with only a fibula. Now, fibula, not being weight-bearing, could not support the weight of the boy. and the doctor told them that this boy would never walk. A few years later, he is not only walking, he's running around, and they take him to the same doctor, and he says, well, he doesn't have a fibula anymore, but what he has is a fully formed tibia. It tells us that the body forms itself in regard to the function that we call for. So bones are very changeable. And just as with myofascial release, you can change the fascia. So indeed, when you press into a bone, within 5 seconds, the trabecular structure starts to rearrange itself. We forget that bones are alive, and that's an enormous error in terms of people thinking in education. Bones are alive every bit as sensate in their own way and as the muscles in our body. Because we wear shoes, we lack the versatility and shock absorption that nature has bestowed with 26 bones in each foot. Think about it, 26 bones in each foot. 52, more than a quarter of the bones in the whole body are in the feet alone. The tibia absorbs too much of the stress of us walking around with shoes on, depriving the 26 bones of the foot from really cascading and doing their fair share of absorbing the shock of walking. From each bone, we get its own story to tell. From the fibula and the tibia, we gain valuable information on how a person relates to their life and the earth that they walk upon, to their emotion, their mind, their spirit, how they walk their walk. This beautiful brother and sister, the tibia and the fibula, the singing bone and the bow, together give us both the strength and the delicacy and set a tone for our lives. They do so usually without calling much attention to themselves. May these words, thoughts, and feelings help us regard and touch the tibia and the fibula with a greater sense of respect, reverence, and compassion. Walt Whitman wrote, I sing the body electric. May we sing the tibia and fibula. May the melodies and harmonies, the duet arising as songs of the tibia and fibula be ones which inspire us deeply along our journey. So you get a sense of the interweavingness and the many-voiced quality with which we look at the anatomy, the function, and the essence and the message that bones have to convey to us throughout the book.
Thank you, David.
Mm-hmm.
Sandra, may we have an intermission between the slides now, between the slides, so that we can, so David can lead us in an embodiment. There we go.
Okay, so shall I talk us through it now?
I'd like to do a little bit of a lead-in with a question, perhaps, about this. Harkening back to your discussion of how your relationship with Jeff developed and how that relationship, that collaboration led to this poetic dance of the Memory Palace of Bones. How did you and Jeff come to the idea that each chapter, each bone focus would have a physicality to it, an embodiment experience?
Well, early on, the proof of the first version of the book went out to a number of readers. One or two.
I was one of them.
Oh, you're one of them. Well, it's all your fault, Elizabeth.
Yes,
Thank you, thank you. The suggestion was to have something practical to ground what we were saying in experience. It made perfect sense to us, and right away we began to write, along with our chapters, the embodiments for each chapter. And embodiments is a beautiful term. Of course, these are basically mind-body exercises, and they were the best things we thought of to say, okay, how can people get into the experience of this? This is also one reason why we recommend, unlike the fast pace of modern life, that you read this book slowly, perhaps just one chapter at a time, because doing the embodiment and thinking about your own meaning, your own experience of your tibia, your fibula, that's the point of the whole thing, is to enlighten our own self-experience and spread the words about that, of what the alive bones are telling us.
Yes. I have been so inspired by doing just as you suggested, taking the time to assimilate each bone with no particular pressure. And that gave me the idea of starting in the summertime, what I call a movement book club or a movement book group, such that we'll meet weekly and take turns leading embodiments, not only the embodiments that you and Jeff have authored, but also the embodiments that the other movement practitioners or manual therapists would like to add. So we'll have a blend of discussion and movement with this book as the guiding text.
Great. Congratulations. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes. You can come and you'll be a guest leader.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So how about the embodiment of the brother and sister of the leg?
Yeah. I'm going to focus on the tibia and just give you a little bit of information about that. As we said, the tibia absorbs stress, particularly when the foot is not able to fully do its job, which was naturally designed for 26 bones to distribute the shock of walking through those bones, but which we don't normally have a sense of the 26 bones really doing that job. Therefore, stress gets passed up to next place up, which is the tibia. So the tibia kind of holds pressure. And one way it does this is that there's a fascia that surrounds the tibia that's called the crural fascia, C-R-U-R-A-L. The crural fascia that's like a fascial stocking around the whole bottom leg. And when there's too much pressure, when there's too much stress being absorbed by the tibia, that crural fascia will tighten and not allow a kind of breathing room that the tibia badly needs. It becomes, rather than a nourishing covering, it becomes a strangling kind of effect on the tibia. So here's a way that you can start to work with this. And we'll work with just one tibia. First of all, I'd like to invite all of us, I'm going to stay here, but all of us, to get up from wherever you are and just take a walk, just 5 or 6 steps in one direction, 5, 6, 7 steps in the other direction. Go back and forth and bring some awareness to your experience, let's say, of the right tibia, and just feel what it feels like. Again, often we just don't bring awareness into a bone or that bone area. So just feel what it feels like to walk back and forth just a little bit. And now come on back to, either if you're lying down, that's fine, but you can do this seated. I'm going to sit up here and show you something. Yes, I too have a tibia. And I want to point out, the crural fascia goes around 3-dimensionally. And what I'd like to suggest is, with that right leg, you can use your fingers, your thumb, you can use the heel of your hand, start just beneath the knee, beneath the tibial tuberosity, and do semicircles, feeling like you're shifting that crural fascia over the bone. On the bone is also a fascia, the periosteum, and then come down about 1.5 inches and go ahead. And again, you can use your intuition too. You can go side to side, up and down. I tend to do semicircles, and come down another little bit, about 1.5 inches, and then another, and then another, and another. So maybe a total of 5 or 6 semicircles that you make with the crural fascia, periosteum, and releasing tension that's restricted the tibia. And once you've done that, I'd like you to take another walk like you did in the first place. excuse me. And to feel if now the right leg feels significantly different than the left. And I'll give you just 30 seconds to feel that out. And assuming you're coming back, you can put it in the chat, certainly, of what difference you felt between the right leg and the left leg. My anticipation is that you felt a dramatic difference and that each of you will have a unique experience of that. So.
In the chat, we have from Susan Fowler says, yes, right feels much softer.
Yeah.
Miss Jacobs from the UK felt looser. David, I know that, and here we go from Margaret Hayes, I noticed my right heel hit the ground with less impact as in contrast to prior to the embodiment. Lisa Leader from Washington, D.C., a lot less tension, and Deborah Hunt, more openness and a more spacious feeling.
Yeah. So when we think of that, the oboe of love, the tibia, now it can play its tune, with a great, with some of the liveliness, and the aspects of liveliness that you're describing. And it's amazing that in a very short period of time, you're addressing how the tibia experiences itself, how you experience it. So sometimes we overestimate the amount of time it takes to have impact. I think you can feel it right away. Thanks for the feedback, everybody. And feel free to do the left leg on your own time. We don't want to discriminate here.
Bill Headley wrote the foreword for your book.
Mm-hmm.
Bill is a prolific anatomy somnonaut and expert in dissection. How did you meet Gil, and how did his work as a somnonaut and a dissector pioneer, how did that shape your approach to these embodiments or your approach to your teaching?
Mm-hmm. Well, Gil's become a good friend, and I definitely admire his work tremendously. As many of you may know, he's partly famous for his speech that he did called the Fuzz speech, in which he gave people a much deeper and somewhat humor-filled picture of what the fascia does. But it turns out that when I met Gil, we talked, and it turned out that we both had revolutionary experiences in our lives because we happened to receive Rolfing from the same Rolfer, Alan Davidson. And Rolfing really opened our eyes to the deeper meaningfulness in the body. Both Gil and I had been kind of philosophical and fairly serious, not really very embodied people. And we credit Alan and of course our own selves for being able to access kind of a new source of meaning in our lives that continues to this day, gratefully.
I just love that you and Jeff, in your decades of life experiences and life evolution around facilitating embodiment for so many of your clients, and it's grounded in your own experience. I just love that you bring your experiences as wise people of manual practice, and you have brought this to a book form, to a writing form, and a book which facilitates embodiment.
Yeah, because people don't realize the wisdom that emerges from their body, and that's a cultural tragedy, really, that we get, those of us who get deeply into body work realize that this kind of psychophysical illiteracy that affects way too many people is something that holds us back from further evolution as people. And so this kindness, this sense of why the bones in every part of us is a source of meaning and beauty is essential, just essential. And this arises out of that essentiality.
Thank you for that truth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are, how many chapters does the book have, and where will we go next?
Well, the book has 24 chapters, and I want to give some high credit to our illustrator, who is also here in Austin, Texas, where I am, named Christy Crames. Christy did a special illustration for each of the chapters, and we just couldn't be happier with the way she embodies the soul of the bone, just as you see in Michelangelo's sketches and Leonardo's. She's just got that spirit. So thank you, Christy. And the next bone we proposed to look at, talking with you, was the sternum. So let's go to the sternum. And I will say, this was the bone that Jeff initially, when he wrote the first part of the first chapter, this was what he sent me. And I was so impressed with the way he interwove respect and beauty and sense of the sternum, at the same time with a touch of relevant autobiography. So I'll read this to you. I vividly remember when I first realized I had a sternum. It was 1971, and I had just spent a year in Nairobi, Kenya, with difficult experience, several bouts of dysentery, getting jailed for busking and playing guitar in front of the posh Stanley Hotel, living next to on no money, and eager to return to the States. When I arrived home, my father handed me my draft notice. Shocked, I exclaimed that I would move to Canada. My father lunged across the living room and planted his fist into the center of my chest. I felt my body wrap itself around his fist as I was introduced to a part of my body that I never knew I had. In all fairness to my father, he was a World War II veteran who believed that the United States belonged to Vietnam. He later changed his mind, and this time when he hit me was the only time he ever did. But like many 18-year-olds, I was unconscious of the workings of my body. In spite of the fact that I was a competitive long-distance runner, my body was simply something I pushed around in the hopes of running faster and farther. My posture was terrible, rounded shoulders, sunken chest, and a stifling of most emotions associated with the heart. After the incident, my father suggested that I get rolfing. No, I'm sorry, a friend suggested that I get rolfing, not only to improve my posture, but to explore why my body took that form and perhaps to experience and express some of those stressed and trapped feelings. Through my series, I discovered much about myself, including the presence of my sternum. I think of this bone as a centerpiece of what some refer to as the body temple. It's what holds things together, in this case, the ribs that attach to it and the heart and lungs beneath them. It's the part of our body we lead with as we present ourselves to the world. In my case, I felt diminished by my religious upbringing, traumas of growing up in a turbulent family system. It's almost as if my body was retreating from the world, not allowed to feel what it felt. Along with the hip and other large bones of the body, the sternum is an area where the maturation of blood cells, white blood cells and red and platelets occur. These cells are associated with blood and at a phenomenological level with one's identity. Receiving body work in this area revealed that my identity was at stake. I really didn't know who I was or what was my purpose in life. Fortunately, my therapy became my passion and my vocation. I learned that the body is intelligent, that every structure in the body, from bones to organs to muscles to fascia, is sensing and integrating vast amounts of information, helping us locate our unique personal power. Each part of the body makes a contribution to consciousness. From a French osteopathic approach that I practice, it considers the sternum a second anterior spine. Just as the spine may become stuck or painful due to fears and wounds we are unconsciously holding on to, the sternum often holds fears and concerns about moving into the future. Yeah, really can enhance our sense of the sternum. You know, the sternum is three parts. The manubrium, which at the top is like a knot of a tie. And then the middle of the sternum, the longest part, has a beautiful name. It's the gladiolus, same root as gladiator and gladiola. And then at the bottom, you have the xiphoid process. Gladiolus and xiphoid both come from the Latin root for blade. So you have that blade, and that's why we call this blade or flower, the flower of the heart, coming from the sternum in its own way as well. What do you think of that, Elizabeth?
You know, I like it better when I hear you read it rather than me reading it quietly. You know, silently. So I think there's much to be said for the resonance of the voice, and that maybe you could one could hear themselves more clearly when giving voice to the richness in this book.
Yeah, well, I mean, the oral tradition, as we said, is what underlies the memory palace. So I'll be happy to do more readings. And if anybody wants, I can do at least a few videos for sure. We haven't agreed on doing a whole audio book, but it's quite tempting. Yeah.
Yes, and this reminds me of our discussion in preparation for this webinar, that you were mentioning your career in music, and which led you to Austin and to your career in massage, and now you are touring worldwide, teaching workshops and accompanying it with book readings, I think.
Book readings and guitar playing. Wherever I go, I either take one of my guitars or have a guitar ready for me, because like body work, like massage is essentially a nonverbal art and science, and so is music. So the whole realm of wisdom that comes from gestures in tone, gestures through the body. They say that 93% of communication is nonverbal. It's an astonishing fact, again, that most people don't recognize. On the other hand, of course, I wrote a book and it contains a lot of words. So I do have a love for poetry and words that can still do a beautiful job conveying some of these truths we have living within us.
That helps to explain my delight, my experience of being buoyed up by delight. Maybe it was little sparks of dopamine that in reading, digestively reading each chapter in not necessarily the linear order of the book, but just what bone appealed to me at the time. That I just marveled at how the richness of the words, the poetry of the words, would facilitate, would spark physical experience or illusion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know, the sternum is a place that obviously we can feel the heart energy manifesting through the sternum. Kindness, I think of the flow of loving kindness coming from this area. And it's another reason to draw your awareness to the sternum. If you'd like, I can do another brief embodiment of those. And let me do that. And you can everybody, you don't necessarily need to get up and go down to lying down, but if lying down feels better while I speak you through the embodiment, that's fine. But as it stands, if you're seated or lying down, just place one hand over the other and let both palms rest over the manubrium of the sternum. Now, a suggestion was made, a beautiful one by Amina Rahim, who's a teacher of, in parallel with zero balancing, of process-oriented acupressure, that the manubrium kind of represents the higher heart, that part of us that is not just self-centered, but is oriented toward helping others, speaking from a higher place. So putting your hands over the higher heart, just feel the manubrium. And perhaps if you want to make a tone like just an ah or an om, you can feel the vibration of your voice through the manubrium. And then take your hands down and place them over the gladiolus of the sternum. So often this is also in yoga, a place where you put this particular mudra, whatever feels appropriate. You might just bring the warmth of your hand and feel that warmth, supporting the warmth of the sternum itself and the heart. And feel the sternum and the gladiolus of the sternum, that idea that just like the gladiola flower, that you have this beautiful, long, living entity that's right here connecting your 24 ribs. In our chapter, we call it 24 ribs, 24 ways the heart finds its home. And then bring your awareness down to the xiphoid process. Now, the xiphoid process is a little kind of pyramidal shaped bone at the bottom of the sternum that, interesting enough, is quite critical, much more so than we thought, of in breath. Imagine that as you breathe in, your xiphoid process wings out a little bit. And as you breathe out, it goes back in. Just feel that movement of the xiphoid process, probably a place you've never particularly specifically brought your awareness. And feel the xiphoid process facilitating the movement of breath, and that itself then facilitating the movement through the whole body. In our book, the xiphoid process is characterized as the trim tab. We say the trim tab of the xiphoid process. The trim tab is something that Jeff learned about through reading Buckminster Fuller. Buckminster Fuller was a great scientist and philosopher, and he noticed that there was something which was attached to the rudder in boats, and he says, "Something hit me very hard once, thinking about what one little man could do. Think of the Queen Mary," he said. "The whole ship goes by, and then comes the rudder. And then there's a tiny thing at the edge of the rudder called a trim tab. It's a miniature rudder. And just moving the little trim tab builds a low pressure that pulls the rudder around. It takes almost no effort at all." So I said that the little individual can be a trim tab. Society thinks it's going right by you, that it's left you all together. But if you're doing dynamic things mentally, the fact is you can just put your foot out like that, and the whole big ship of state is going to move accordingly. So we all dream and hope that the trim tab within us and the trim tab of positive social action can make a difference in this world. It's the homeopathy of social process as well as biological process. So welcome to the meaningfulness of the manubrium, gladiolus, and the xiphoid process constituting the sternum. Fascinating, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I just marvel at the collective wisdom that you and Jeff channel, that you bring through on such a variety of levels. The ones that speak to how our world, our culture is changing now, and the embodied wisdom from the early on when the tibia was a wind instrument.
Yeah, yeah. I
Just
mean, the idea that the memory palace is holding ancestral memories, solutions that nature has come up with for how to walk, for how to live, and that these are essential pieces of information for every single person on earth.
Mhm, mhm.
I
Sandra,
like getting hyperbolic about all this, of course.
yes, which leads you so well to being such an effective writer. Sandra, may we have an intermission from the slides now? And because I'd like to, David, I'm curious, how is it that you and Jeff, well, I guess that Jeff was drawn to explore in writing, explore the bones. I ask this because you'd mentioned you're teaching muscles and a previous book, returning the soul to the body, putting the soul in the
Go
body.
back in the body.
In the body. You mentioned that there was an emphasis on muscles there. Right?
Yeah.
And I know from attending dissection workshops with Gil and others that there is yes, there's an appreciation of muscle tissue and of bone tissue and also of the connective tissue. So how do you and Jeff bring in the awareness of the connective tissue and ground it in the bones?
Well, it's kind of unavoidable, but it is true that so much of the focus, particularly in people who become massage therapists and even other kinds of body workers, whether they be Rolfers, movement workers, body-centered psychotherapists, there's a lot of attention on the muscles, on the fascia. The fascia has become like a divine substance, as Ida Rolf said. Fascia is the organ of structure, she said. Well, this is very true, and yet, of course, you can't have structure in the human body without the bones. So it really, you should talk about skeletofascial structure, that the bones are the armature for the whole human body. So how could we not be fascinated with them? And yet we've only seen, for the most part, most people, dead bones, and therefore they can tend to be dismissed as vital in the same way in which muscles are. So massage therapists are not educated about how do you touch bone in a way that is as sensitive and caring as you touch the muscles. So when I first heard Fritz Smith, Dr. Fritz Smith, who's the founder of Zero Balancing, talk, he said, and I must say, I went into this talk feeling like there was something in the body I wasn't getting my hands on, even though I'd studied all sorts of body work. And he said, well, there are anatomical layers. There's the skin, which is on your surface, and that's identified in Chinese medicine as with the Wei Qi, that is the protective or insulatory layer in some ways. Then there's the muscles and the organs that are described beautifully by the meridian system as well as Western anatomy. And that's addressed wonderfully through deeper body work, Rolfing, etc. And then you have the bones. And the bones are the deepest structure within us, the core, the deepest flows of energy, because there is characteristic energy flowing through each of these different layers. Well, when Fritz said that the bones are the core energy, that the idea that I just know it in my bones was not a turn of phrase, but was a sense of like, I know that in my core, I am that in my core. That lit a light bulb over my head. I literally felt the light bulb like in a comic book. And I went, oh my God, that's what I haven't been touching. I haven't been touching with the same level of care and knowledge and clarity as I've been bringing into the work that I'd been teaching then, which was a soulful approach to myofascial work. So that's some of the sense of why bone has been captivating, not only to myself, but also to Jeff Rockwell. Jeff's studied, between chiropractic, osteopathy, and his study of zero balancing. He is completely on board as well. So it really is a wonderful brotherhood that we came upon in terms of our understanding and passion about the deepest layer in our lives.
Now, given that you and Jeff are not only practitioners for decades, but also educators, and you travel widely to educate manual therapists primarily, how is this book influencing or changing the education process for manual practitioners?
Right. Well, I'd start by saying that certainly anyone who's interested in zero balancing will be fascinated by this book because it only builds on each of our imaginations and each of our appreciations and respect for this skeletal layer. But more than that, this is a forefront, this is a pioneering step for all massage therapists, for all rolfers, even for osteopaths who still may have a mechanical view of the bones and the joints, as opposed to also an imaginative view. To understand a human being takes imagination. It doesn't just take facts. And so that's what it brings to us. And so far, the sales have been really kind of astonishing. And I just really hope that everybody reads this book. I said, everybody who has bones, that's our target market. Everybody who has bones, they need to understand this core of themselves, because it's a place that you can go to and feel that you're going to your essence, you're going to your source. It's identified in Chinese medicine as the energy of ancestral qi. And that itself is a very pregnant and powerful thing to say. Our life doesn't come from ourselves. Our life is a gift each of us gets to get. But when you are really in your bones, you feel like, oh, this is the gift that I've gotten that then radiates out from the bones into the rest of one's being. Interestingly enough, in the chapter on the clavicle is a great discovery. I found some passages that indicated that an African tribe, the Dogon in Mali, believed that the clavicle was the first bone and that the rest of our bodies developed from it. Now, it turns out that the clavicle is the first bone to develop in utero. And so it's one of the last bones to fully ossify as well. So each of these bones is miraculous. And, in terms of the Dogon's belief that the body gets created from the clavicle, well, the body gets created from the participation and the orchestration of all the bones. And every action we take is a reflection and orchestration of all of our movements. So how could we not be fascinated? I don't know.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Your commissioning editor from Handspring, Mary Law, writes in the chat, I agree. This is a book for everyone, not just for therapists. As David said, it is relevant to any who has bones. Mm-hmm. We take them so much for granted.
It's totally true. Yeah. It's like looking at the essence. Yeah.
Let's take a look now, Sandra, at the slide so people will know how to order the book. And then David will come back with you for questions and discussion, because there are many comments and of appreciation from the chat.
Great.
So the Memory Palace of Bones, Exploring Embodiment Through the Skeletal System, is available now for 20% discount And you can use the code MTL, that's Move to Learn 1704, when you go to checkout from www.handspringpublishing.com. This deep discount for the purchase of the book is good through May 17th of this year, 2023. Now, let's take a look at how you can stay in touch with David and with Jeff. Here's how you can stay in touch with the authors. Their website, their Facebook, their email addresses. So a screenshot, or of course, this is being recorded, so you can access it later through YouTube. And
Just
we'll take a look.
To say my email address, I just want to say it's not David1, it's David L at tlcschool.com. I run and started in 1989 a massage school in Austin, Texas, which is called the Lauterstein Conway Massage School in Austin, TLC. So just to explain that email.
Yes, thank you for that clarification.
Mhm.
And let's take a look at your schedule of teaching coming up. David, would you talk us through this?
Sure. Well, it's interesting enough. I experimented in a recent class in Costa Rica where I taught zero balancing 1 and 2, just one right after the other, which is rarely done. And I found out that it really was a very, very successful format. So then I thought, well, why don't I just do all the courses that are required for certification? It's 100 hours of zero balancing courses. Why don't I do them in an intensive format? So beginning May 4th, we're indeed going to do a live here in Austin series of the 100 hours of courses that you need in order to become certified as a zero balancing practitioner. And by the way, we're almost full. So I'm very gratified that there's been a wonderful response to that. So that's the next big thing I have coming up this year, which begins on May 4th. And then I'm going to be teaching, and I'm going to include some of the material from the Memory Palace in this Deep Massage 1 and 2, which again combine two courses that usually I've had a span of time between them. I find that it adds intensity to go into the surface in the middle and the depth, almost like going through skin, muscle, and bone. Deep Massage 1 and 2. And that's going to be in Costa Rica toward the end of June, 2 days off in the middle. You arrive a day early, leave a day after. And it's an outdoor classroom. I mean, it's important if you can learn massage in paradise and get the input of the ocean that's only about 200 yards away from the school. It's an incredible experience getting out of your normal realm. So that's June 20th through July 1st. And then I'm teaching in England at the Bristol College of Massage and Bodywork. I've been teaching in England now for over 20 years. And for the last about 5, it's been at the Bristol College of Massage and Bodywork, a wonderful place that's been devoted again to a really quite embodied and spiritual as well as physical approach to massage and bodywork. And so I'll be there. I'm going to do a first day for past students and zero balancers, which is going to be devoted to deep massage and the Memory Palace. So I'll be referring to it very explicitly there, as well as in Costa Rica. And then a 4-day class, which is like a one-room school room, because I have people who are new to studying with me, as well as people who've studied with me for 5 or 10 years. So I just give different techniques, but the lectures are intended and the discussions for everyone. It works incredibly well. And I'm delighted to go back to Bristol. And then lastly, I go to the school owned by my good friend Nancy Dale in Waldoboro, Maine, just north of where Tom Myers lives and sometimes teaches his anatomy trains there. It's in Waldoboro, Maine, Down East School of Massage Therapy. And I'm going to be teaching, basically it's going to be deep massage 1 with a special focus on working with the iliopsoas and its neighbors. Recently, I attended a talk with Gil Headley and Jan Sultan of the Rolf Institute. Jan said that Ida was asked, where would you work if you could work in only one place? And she said, I would work on the 12th rib. So this is part of our inspiration for looking at the psoas and looking at the lower aspects of the rib cage and respiration. So that's going to be in Maine, October 6th through 8th. So a lot of fun stuff coming up.
Indeed, you're prolific at home and prolific around the world.
I'm easily bored. I have to do these things.
Sandra, may we will, I think, leave the slides for now and pick up on some of the points that are suggested in the chat. Susan Lowell de Salarzano has meant, although I think that she thanked you and said she had to step off to the next event, but she says, I'm wondering if it's helpful or misleading to think of the tibia fibula sister brother system as having some of the force management qualities of an outrigger canoe.
Sure. Perfect sense, especially since in our chapter on the foot, we talk about the navicular and the fact that all bones are floating. We forget that again. Along with thinking bones aren't alive, we forget bones are floating in the intracellular matrix, cerebral spinal fluid, and they're flowing in rhythmic ways in response to the heart, the lungs, and so on. So we're all floating and in these canoes and these ships of our lives. And I'm totally for the outrigger canoe. Matter of fact, I have behind me, you can't quite see it, but I have a thing I call the Lauterstein Small Boat Museum. And I have 40 small boats. Here, there's one of them here on my desk here from Greece, actually. Beautiful gold and ocean. So I'm in love with boats. And in Zero Balancing, Fritz talks about the sailboat imagery, that the sailboat or the canoe in her case is like the structure, and the mast, of course, is part of that structure, but the wind is the energy. And what we want to do is get the structure and energy related to one another in such a way that you have forward momentum in your life. So that's part of Zero Balancing. It's part of appreciating the bone and the mast-like navigational qualities that the structure of our bones and masts provide for us.
Yes.
So right on with your comment. Thank you.
Yes. The teaching and the practicing of zero balancing is so significant to you, and you've made so many references to it. I'll just note that Handspring has published a book remind me again of the author, because we hosted him.
I believe it's Alan Hext has written a book for that same publisher. Alan's a dear friend of mine, one of the original certified teachers in England, and we're in close touch. Matter of fact, at one point we were thinking of co-writing the biography of Dr. Fritz Smith, which I ended up writing, called Life in the Bones, a biography of Zero Balancing and Dr. Fritz Smith. So anyway, Alan and I are very good buddies, and I recommend his book highly. It's brilliant. Alan had been teaching for Worsley, the greatest acupuncture teacher in the West, for quite a while. And so his embodiment, not only of the bony system, but also of the meridians and the energy flows, is remarkable. So check out his book too. I think it's called Zero Balancing Structure and Energetics of Body Work, something like that.
There were a number of movement educators. Oh. Yes, what are you thinking?
I just see a note from Mary Law. I forgot, they also published, I thought it was a different publisher, but it's not, Jim McCormick's book. Jim was actually the very first person who was certified to be a teacher in Zero Balancing. So Jim is kind of like the preeminent bodywork teacher worldwide, as well as particularly throughout the US. So anything Jim has to say, he has a terrific understanding uh, that comes through his book and through seminars that he does, one of which is called Touching the Whole Person, that takes advantage of his extensive experience in body-centered psychotherapy. So I very much recommend Jim McCormick's book as well.
Yes. Thank you for that. And thank you,
Mhm.
Mary. I know that, that I had interviewed him, but I don't have his book at the forefront here. I only have the upcoming books. so,
Mhm.
so it's by James McCormick, published by Handspring. It's called Zero Balancing Conscious Touch and Transformation.
Yeah. Superb.
Yes. Um, a number of people in the chat have be appreciative of the code and have said that they will buy one for a friend, also buy the Memory Palace of Bones, a friend. I'd like to, Sandra, maybe have the next slide, please. I'd like to invite everyone to join us in June. I believe it's June 17th, when we will focus on a very recent publication from Singing Dragon, Handspring. Join us, Monday, June 19th, to meet Maureen Mason, author of Pelvic Rehabilitation, the Manual Therapy and Exercise Guide Across the Lifespan. Thank you, Sandra. And David, back to you for closing closing blessings or opening blessings for our journey through the Memory Palace.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for your invitation. And I do hope that everyone is inspired to kind of spread that word, because as we say, this wisdom that the skeleton has is irreplaceable. That, you know, we say, Wilhelm Reich talked about body armor and how that lived in the neuromuscular system. One of the most exciting things is to realize is that our neuroses, for the most part, do not live in the skeletal system. Underneath all of the craziness that they say in Yiddish, all the mishigas, there is something underneath it all that lets us know as body workers, as humans, that there's a sanity that underlies our difficulties. There's a life that underlies our personality. And none of us would feel comfortable touching other people if we didn't have that conviction, which lies at our very core, that we do have something worthwhile, that we do have something that's non-problematic, and that we can help put people in touch with that part of themselves that really does have wisdom, does have beauty, does have goodness, and that's an essential thing to do. So that's my the last piece of the sermon for today, I think.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, David.
Mm-hmm. Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll look forward to your accessing the recording of this webinar with David.